The hospital room had already fallen into a hush that only death could command. Monitors flatlined, their eerie silence stretching like a held breath. A man pressed against the wall, his suit crumpled, hands clasped over his mouth. The senior doctor gestured toward the door, while a nurse stared at the floor, her gaze lost in the stillness of an 8-month-old's lifeless body. Then a boy pushed through the entrance, unnoticed at first, small, unassuming, with muddy shoes and the quiet presence of someone accustomed to fading into the background. He followed the father's desperate sprint from 3 blocks away, driven by an instinct he couldn't explain. The sink beckoned, and in the next 60 seconds everything would shift. Before we proceed, if you believe that courage has no address and kindness wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to WhatsApp Kindness Tailies, and share this with someone who needs to remember that people can be good. Kyle was 11, small for his age, and had spent 8 months without a permanent home. He lived between a church shelter that closed at dawn and a makeshift space under an overpass, where he'd turned concrete and cardboard into a fragile sanctuary. His backpack held 3 things: a pair of clean socks, a faded photograph of his mother, and a worn book about the human body whose spine had split from countless readings. That book mattered. It would matter. Kyle's fascination with medicine began at 6, when his sister stopped breathing during an allergic reaction, and a paramedic's steady hands restored her life. He decided then to understand how the body worked, what could go wrong, and how to fix it. Without school or a library card, he scavenged knowledge from pamphlets, old textbooks, and that battered anatomy book, memorizing a chapter on infant emergencies he'd never thought he'd need. His mornings began the same way, sitting in a park, nibbling a granola bar, watching the city breathe. That day he noticed the man in the expensive suit sprinting down the street, arms cradling a small bundle. Kyle stood, felt an unspoken pull, and followed. By the time he reached the hospital, the father had been ushered inside. Kyle slipped through the swinging doors, tracking voices to a room where the doctor's hand had just signaled the end. The baby had been found unresponsive, likely having aspirated fluid while in a bouncy seat that had tilted during a moment of solitude. 4 minutes of frantic efforts had failed. Then Kyle reached the sink. In the corner, a flicker, a finger twitch, barely perceptible. He didn't hesitate. Lifting the infant, he positioned him under the cool stream of water, supporting the head and neck just as the book had taught. The physician's shout of "What are you doing?" cut through the chaos. Kyle didn't turn. His voice was calm, steady. "Please just give me a minute." Something in his tone, earned through years of reading, not posturing, stilled the room. 40 seconds later, the baby coughed, then cried. Monsters were reattached, hands flew, and the father collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Kyle placed the child on the examination table, retrieved his backpack, and moved toward the door when Garrison Vale, his face streaked with tears and exhaustion, called him back. "Before we continue," Garrison said, "we want you to know what made this possible." 2 years earlier, a volunteer named Dorothy had left a box of donated books outside the clinic, not sorting them, just refusing to discard them. Kyle had found the box at dawn and taken one book. Harold, a retired paramedic, held informal first aid sessions at the shelter, allowing all comers. Kyle attended 3 times, learning about airways and infant positioning. Irene, the shelter supervisor, never locked the door on cold mornings when Kyle lingered. None were in the hospital, but all were there. Garrison asked Kyle where he lived. Instead of pity, he asked, "What do you want to do with your life? And what do you need to do it?" Their agreement wasn't charity, but partnership. Kyle enrolled in school, lived with a foster family supported by Garrison's foundation, and received a tutor, a library card, and a winter coat. He kept the anatomy book. 4 years later, he led a medical symposium, asking precise questions that left presenters stunned. Garrison's son, now 5, called him something untranslatable, the one who stayed. Before high school, Kyle wrote letters to Dorothy, Harold, and Irene thanking them. Dorothy cried for 20 minutes after reading his words, then called her sister. Harold replied on yellowed paper, saying he'd taught those sessions for 11 years and never heard of their outcomes. Irene didn't write back, but framed the letter above her door, still leaving it unlocked. "Never dismiss a person because they sleep in a shelter tonight. Never assume someone with nothing knows nothing. Never mistake quiet for emptiness or worn shoes for a small life. The knowledge that saves a life might live in a box left on a pavement by someone who simply couldn't throw it away. If this story moved you, like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to believe in people today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of courage, resilience, and the quiet decisions that change everything. Because kindness doesn't always arrive in a white coat. Sometimes it comes in a torn gray shirt carrying a book with a broken spine, and it stays when everyone else has stepped back. Welcome to Kindness Tales. We're so glad you're here.